Booktube, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm telling you about the 7 books that I read in June. First book that I read in June was Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. This is the first in a 3-part series. Not because they're a continuation of the same story, but they're 3 companion novels. Tells the story of these 2 pastoral families where both men are pastors. One I think is Presbyterian and one is Methodist. They're next door neighbors and they've lived next to each other in the same town and known each other for their whole lives, these 2 elderly men. And in both of the novels, when we meet the men, they're at the end of their lives, at the end of their careers, surely, but also at the end of their physical lives, and they're making preparations for how the world continues after them. I've been reading the series a little bit out of order. First, I read the second in the series, which is Home, and this one features the Barton family. The older man who has 8 children. His wife has died and 2 of his children are back at home tending to him in his last days. And in this book we get to see Ames's life through his own recollections, his own memories. In this book, the symbol of his life's work is the church, the physical structure, as well as the impact that his religious thought has had on his parishioners. And as he gets older, he sees the members of his church not really taking care of the building. And so this book is tinged with sadness and regret as we see this old man kind of deal with the inevitability of his influence being removed, even while he's still alive to see it. So this is a book that I would strongly recommend. It has some deep religious themes, but it's not focused on religion. It's more focused on the effect of philosophy and religion and culture and time on a person, and how a person changes over the course of their own life with respect to all of those influences. So I gave this one 4 stars. After that, I read a memoir written by Jennifer Jones Austin entitled Consider It Pure Joy. I no longer have that book because it was kind of a gift and I gave it to someone else to read. And in this book, she explains how she was diagnosed with leukemia, a very aggressive form of leukemia, in which after her diagnosis, she was given just a few hours to live. And now writing her memoir more than a decade later, she explains how being sick was really a gift that allowed her to kind of slow down and focus on what life really meant and the impact of the choices that she was making up to that point, and how she has changed her life, how she has seen herself, how she has seen her life's work change because of the illness that she dealt with, and how the things that she had done leading up to her diagnosis helped her use her illness to make the world a better place. In the book, she allows the reader access into her very intimate moments as she deals with her illness on a physical and mental and emotional and spiritual way. And it was just a very moving experience to have read that book and to see the real reactions of the people who loved her and the people who she loved and was afraid for as they went through the experience with her. So Consider It Pure Joy is another book that I would recommend for its ability to touch on philosophy, but also to touch on emotion. So I don't have the book anymore, so I'll insert a clip of me holding up the book here, but know that I read it in June. After that, I was ready for some light reading, so I picked up Man Booker Prize winning The Sense of an Ending by Julian, which was not light reading. In this one, we meet 4 friends when they're teenagers in a British high school, and as teenage boys would do, they're going to a boys' school and they are meeting for classes and having these philosophical discussions with their teachers in the academic setting and speaking about philosophy and religion and the complexities of life and death, as schoolboys would be, interested from a scholarly perspective, but not having the life experiences to really give this discussion any meat. Later, we follow the narrator through his young life as he deals with first the suicide of one of his school friends while they're in high school, and later with the tragic death of one of his friends. And we go through life with this narrator and watch him having to understand philosophy from a more personal way, because of the experiences that he's had. So the novel happens in these two almost contradictory parts. In the first part, we meet Tony, the narrator, and his friends dealing with the development and inevitable unraveling of these high school kind of casual relationships. And in the second part, the older middle-aged man having to deal with the repercussions of those same relationships that have unraveled and gotten back together and unraveled again, but also now being forced to pay penance for their blasé casualness that was delivered in youth, and with the unaffectedness of a person who just doesn't have the experience in which to contextualize their actions. So in this novel, Barnes offers us an opportunity to really examine the little moments that make up a life, and how easily that life could become one thing or another based on just those fleeting moments that seem so disconnected at the time when they're happening, at the moment that you're living them. It doesn't seem like it relates to this big picture after all, but how at another point in life, as we mature, as we come to grips with some of the little moments that we may have misspent and the little infractions that we committed without thinking about the repercussions that they could have, or the extent that we may be helping or hurting another person. And so while the author put what was happening with these characters within this more global historical frame, it's also an opportunity for us to think about our own personal history and what our narrative will look like when it is history as well. Then I read In a Free State by V.S. Naipaul. This is a collection of short stories. The first and last story is a journal entry in which all of the story takes place aboard some ship where all the characters are travelers, and so they're basically on equal footing. Then we have two short stories in which we have Indian immigrants who have left their country and have moved to, one in Washington, D.C., one in London. And so we have these immigrants who are living in these other countries, and we see their attempts to assimilate. And the final novella, which is the titled In a Free State, follows these British expatriates who are living and working in this unnamed African state, and about the relationship that they have when they are immigrants in an African country, as opposed to the previous short stories in which Indian immigrants are the ones who have moved to a place where there is a white majority. In the first travel journal, the characters are not named, and so they're only represented by the demographic that they're from. And so whether they are from Africa or Egypt, they become the Egyptian or the African or the English tramp. And it becomes a web of stereotypes where we take all these preconceived ideas that we have about these people and put them all together and see which one emerges victorious. Even within that travel journal, however, there was a battle between good and evil, in that all the characters become anonymous except for the villain. He's the only one who has a name, as though the only way to escape the anonymity, the only way to shed the stereotypes, is to resort to a life of crime. Within these stories, we get to see how people relate differently to the people that they knew in their former life, even when those people accompany them to the new world, how their relationships change or how they're different, and how in order to survive and indeed to thrive in this new world, immigrants have to not just let go of their previously held beliefs, they also have to leave the relationships that they were a part of. Within these stories, the author offers a look at what traveling does to relationships and does to individuals who move as well. The different ways that travelers are called depending on where they're coming from, and indeed depending on their origins and the color of their skin. The word immigrant versus the word expatriate, depending on where you're moving from and moving to. The way a person who is an outsider comes in and views the people that he has found there. And while I didn't agree with a lot of the way this book was written, I do see that this is a theme that is as relevant today as when it was written. There was a lot in this book that felt derogatory towards racial groups. The subtleties that creep into our language and expose what we're really thinking and feeling about these people moving, whether they're moving in on us or whether we're moving in on them. 4 stars for In a Free State by V.S. Naipaul, and another Man Booker Prize winning book read. Then I read The Life and Times of Michael K. by J.M. Coetzee, which is another Man Booker Prize winning book, and I'll insert the clip where I talked about that here because I don't have that book anymore. Life and Times of Michael K. is a novel by J.M. Coetzee. He won the Man Booker Prize in 1983 for this novel. It's set in Cape Town, South Africa, and it follows this young man named Michael K. He's born with a cleft lip, except it's one of the simpler instances of the cleft palate where it could be fixed with surgery. And several times he's told, and other people around him are told, that it will be a simple procedure to fix it and to rid him of his disfigurement, except no one ever does anything about it. And this disfigurement keeps Michael K. confined to a life of solitude. His mother is afraid that he'll be teased. His mother is afraid that she will be hurt when he is teased, and so she keeps him close to her, until eventually he goes to some kind of a boys' home, which he calls the name, but I don't know the reference. Eventually, when he ages out of that system and he goes and he finds a job as a gardener, he spends most of his life in solitude. The intermittent interactions that he has with his mother, with people at his job, with the boys at his boys' home, and he's telling this as he remembers it as an adult. Almost all the interactions that Michael K. has while he's passing through the landscape of Cape Town, he's living this nomadic existence. First, he starts trying to take his mother, his sick mother, back to her childhood home. And then when she dies pretty soon in the novel, Michael K. spends a lot of his time in solitude, exploring his thoughts, exploring the land, exploring the periphery of the war that is going on around him, and that he tries to navigate by spending time in the mountains, except it is to his own personal detriment. But even while you want to criticize him for spending so much of his time alone and not seeking out interactions, whenever he meets people, it is with these jarring and gritty encounters that it almost makes solitude preferable. And so this book becomes an exploration of solitude versus relationship, and it perhaps will challenge what you thought you believed about either one beforehand. Then I finished up Vernon God Little by D.B.C. Pierre. This is another Man Booker Prize winning book, and this is a book that we started off reading a couple of months ago for the Run Right Reads book club, and it was difficult to read because it started to parallel a real life situation that was happening. It follows this 15-year-old boy in Texas. His best friend shoots up a schoolyard and kills a bunch of his classmates and then kills himself, so he's no longer available for questioning. Police suspect Vernon of having been an accomplice, especially since he wasn't injured in the shooting and he wasn't in the classroom at the time when it happened. He had been on some kind of an errand for his teacher. And throughout the book we get to see all these characters who could provide assistance for Vernon but fail in their ability to protect him as a child, because he's still a minor, he's 15. But instead they use him as a pawn, moving him from one to the other relationship, using him for their own personal pleasure, for their own mobility, and no one thinking about what it's doing to Vernon. So we have the teacher who uses him to carry out his own nefarious activities and refusing to provide the alibi that would clear Vernon's name because it would be destructive to his own career. Then we have the psychologist who's supposed to protect him but ends up abusing him. We have the police woman who's supposed to be interrogating him with the blind eye of justice to finding the truth, but she's so distracted by her own gluttonous desires that she can't focus on her job long enough to really see that this kid is innocent. Then we have his mother and his aunt, his mother's best friend, and where they should be stepping in to protect this kid. All of them are subject to their own desires, their own cravings, and no one seems aware of what is happening with this kid until it is almost, or indeed probably, too late. D.B.C. Pierre's novel is a satirical look at the justice system, at its failures to protect the people that it's supposed to, often blaming victims for crimes that have been committed against them, and the failure to indict the real criminals, which in this story there are so many criminals that you're not even sure at the end who is the real perpetrator, who is the person who's really at fault for all the things that have happened in this community. While there has been an epidemic of school shootings in the 15 years since this book was published and won the Man Booker Prize, this is a 2003 winner, this book forces us to really come to grips with some of the things that have happened around us and forces us to look at those situations through different lens. What are some of the systems that we have allowed to be built up on our watch that have created the kind of monsters who go to schools and kill children? What are some of the ways that we could be held personally responsible for the failures to protect our children, whether in schools or in our society at large? And so this book is introspective in a lot of different ways, not just about school shootings, because that happens really early. In fact, it happens outside of the book. And the novel is really centered on the fallout, on what it means to have lived through such an excruciatingly difficult experience and find that that is not the worst thing that has ever happened to you. Vernon God Little by D.B.C. Pierre. And finally, I read 1987 Man Booker Prize winning Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively, which is a woman's recollections of her life as she lies on her deathbed trying to formulate a story about history, but also putting it in the context of her own life. What are the historical events that have shaped her life, and how does she see her own life, having lived it, in the context of those historical events? The book is whimsically put together in that nothing that you read at first seems like it's correct. There are 2 or 3 alternate narratives happening kind of simultaneously within this book. There is the story that Claudia has lived and is thinking about while she thinks about the story that she wants to write, and while in her semi-conscious state, the nurses and doctors and the people who come to visit her are also talking about her as well. And so all of these are being reported in the same time, in the same place, in the same space, and the reader is forced to try to pick what is real from what is being said. When we meet Claudia through the reports of her nurses and doctors who are reading her chart and saying that she is childless, except that she had a miscarriage at some point, we are convinced that she doesn't have any children, but later we're told that she has a daughter, Lisa, who comes to visit her. And so we're not sure if Lisa is a real person or a fantasy that Claudia has conjured up based on maybe her own maternal leanings or her regrets of having dealt with the miscarriage in her earlier life. She has a fascination with her older brother, and through her recollections of their childhood and the struggles that they had for power as they grew older, we later see his relationship with his wife and the struggle that Claudia has with her sister-in-law. And we're not sure what we believe, whether the relationship that she has with her brother Gordon is inappropriate, whether it's incestuous, or whether she's just resentful of this new connection that he's made with some other woman. And so in this way, we're not sure what we're supposed to believe, what is indeed the truth. But it becomes even more multidimensional because Claudia was a historian, but also a fictional writer. Through this novel, we see this woman at the end of her life, remaking her own history, retelling her history the way she wants it told, but struggling to find the words to call things. I found the story spellbinding and inspirational, and also it gave me an opportunity for self-reflection and some sadness. As a reader of other people's history, as a writer of my own history, and the way I fictionalize some of my real experiences, I found the character that Claudia is and the character that Claudia creates of herself, both of those manifestations to be very familiar and very understandable. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because I don't want to tell you too much about my own life by describing Claudia's. Now we have Booklinks. I didn't do it last month because I didn't read that many books in May. So in June, the first 2 books that I read in June were Gilead and Consider It Pure Joy. Both of those books had biblical themes. That's an easy link. Both of them had a person who was faced with the end of their life and having to deal with that realization and making plans for what life would be like for their survivors. So while those two main characters are being faced with the reality of their mortality, they're also using their what they consider to be their final moments to prepare their survivors for what life is going to be like when they're not around. Consider it pure joy in the sense of an ending. Again, both have characters that are looking at what death means because they see people dying around them, and they're being forced to confront the effect that the little things that they do in their lives have on the other people. So in her memoir, there's a point where Jennifer is really sick and she knows that she has to go back to the hospital, but she delays returning to the hospital because she knows the effect that it will have on her family. And so she prolongs going back for treatment because she wants to stay to celebrate a holiday with her family. In the sense of an ending, of course, we have Tony and his crass, carelessly spoken words. He gets to see the effect that thoughtlessness has on the people around him. Both of these books also feature a strong maternal character who is behind the scenes, almost pulling strings, arranging things for the people that she loves, but not letting them know what she's doing. In both of these books, we have characters who travel overseas and are separated from contact and communication with their family for some period of time. In A Sense of an Ending, we have Tony coming to the United States for a while, and while he's taking some time for some personal reflection and trying to improve himself, a tragic event happens that he's not present to help or to really do anything about, and so it is to his dismay when he comes back and finds out that major thing happened and he wasn't around for it. In one of the stories in this collection, we have two brothers in India who are separated when the younger brother moves to England to study, and the older brother stays at home and prepares himself to join his brother in England. But that separation of distance eventually leads to a separation of thought and a separation of identity. And while they reconnect physically, they're never able to really bridge that gap that was created because of the time that they spent apart. And so in both of these books, we get to see the effect that physical separation has on those relationships. Both of these books have an African setting. In a Free State is set in an unnamed African state where the main characters are Europeans interacting with the African natives. And in this one, Michael K is the African native encountering the soldiers who seem to be of a different race, even though it's not specifically stated that either one is black or white. But you see the interactions between these people of very different classes and very different backgrounds, very different occupations, as you see in this book. In both of these books, the main character is accused of having committed a crime and so spends a lot of his time defending his innocence. In Life and Times of Michael K, the protagonist is so simply honest that people don't believe that he could be that honest, and so they expect that he's just a sneaky, that he must be a criminal because everyone around him seems to be a criminal. In a similar way, Vernon in this novel is guilty by association because his best friend has committed a crime and no one seems able to believe that he was not an accessory to the crimes and he must have known something. In these two books, we have child characters who are dealt a bad hand with the parents that they have, where their parents essentially abandon them, if not physically, emotionally so, and they have to deal with that falling out. Even as children struggling to create their own identity, they don't have that strong link, that strong mooring to a parental figure that would allow them to develop with a strong psychological background. And so in both of these books, we see the effect of parental neglect on these two very different characters. And of course, the challenge now is to link the last book that I read with the first book that I read in June. And in both of these books, we have older characters. I think both of these characters, when we meet them, are 76 years old. And they are both facing their own impending death and writing the story of their lives the way they want it to be remembered, even if some of it is not quite the truth, and even if they omit a big part of what the real story really is. And so that's it. That's my June reads. That's the book links. A lot of these books are linking with each other because as I read, especially as I read these Man Booker books, I'm finding a lot of the same themes being repeated through these books. But thanks for watching this video. I know it's long, but thanks for sticking with me. If you're still here, next video is going to be short and sweet and hopefully a lot more fun. So leave me a comment down below if you've read any of these books and want to talk more about them. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who doesn't know that I have a booktube channel. So we'll talk in the comments, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.